All right, welcome everybody. First thing I want to say is I love these little lion logos and lunch bags. That's go Columbia, Lions. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce our speaker, Cecilia Chapiro, because I get that honor because I've had the honor of mentoring Cecilia over the past year. She is an Obama Foundation Scholar here at Columbia University. 3-4 years ago, President Obama, with President Bollinger, established Obama Foundation Scholars at the university. And every year they take roughly a dozen, 15, how many scholars are there each year? 12, just 12, from all over the world. And the best and the brightest from Columbia spend a year here. And I had the opportunity to mentor a scholar every year since then. Here's Cecilia, and she is the best. Been a real pleasure working with her the past year and getting to learn about her interests, her expertise, and what she's going to do later in life. So, what I want to tell you about Cecilia is that she helped found the UNICEF Fund for Innovation, and has really advanced into the world of crypto, and they got that fund to head in that direction. She also, at the same time, founded her own social enterprise called Unison Youth. She's based in Argentina, where that organization is based, which helps develop social entrepreneurs to foster economic development, create jobs in low-income communities. So let me turn it over to Cecilia and her presentation on the blockchain humanitarian sector. Please join me in welcoming Cecilia.
Everyone, and thank you, Bruce. You probably know how busy he is, and it's really a great honor for me to have support throughout this experience of the Obama Fellowship. So thank you, and thank you for your words. So I'll get this started. So blockchain in the humanitarian sector, and I wanted to start with a story. So this is Musun. She is a girl that was born in Daraa, Syria. For those that don't know, Daraa is a city in the south of Syria, bordering Lebanon, Turkey, and Iraq. This is Daraa today, and you may wonder what happened to make a city look like this. So over the past 50 years, Syria has been governed by an authoritarian government without democratic elections. And because of that, in March 2011, a group of civilians started peaceful protests to demand democratic reforms. So the government of Syria very quickly responded with violence, and one casualty turned into thousands. To this day, since 2011, there's been more than 500,000 deaths and more than 7 million people who have fled Syria and gone somewhere else. Musun and her family were able to flee Syria in 2013 and establish themselves in a refugee camp that looks something like this. So can you imagine what it would be like to live in one of these tents where there's no electricity, where you may not have the privacy of your own bathroom, where you don't have an easy access to drinkable water or to food resources, where you're far away from your home, your language sometimes, and your friends and family, and where the options for education and work are very limited. So this is, of course, a really hard thing, but it's not just for a few, but to a lot of people. So the last count indicated that there's 84 million people in the world today that have been forced to leave their homes. And this also means that there's an average amount of 3 million new refugees in the world every year, which means there's one new refugee in the world every 10 seconds, which is less than the time that it takes me to complete that sentence. By the time our session today will be over, there'll be 360 new refugees in the world. That to me is insane. And it was challenges like this one that motivated me and my team at UNICEF over the past few years to try to find solutions to mitigate the problems that being a refugee and problems like this one creates. So I was operating a fund that invests in emerging technologies that have the potential to improve the lives of children. And we defined emerging technologies like those that overlap between $100 million industries and more than 1 billion people's needs. So basically what this means is the kinds of technologies that are in growing markets, in financially sustainable markets, but also have the impact to improve the lives of a lot of people. In 2018, I launched the blockchain cohort of investments, and it wasn't exactly an intuitive choice back then. You may have heard some news about blockchain over the past few years, specifically probably about cryptocurrencies, which is the most common application of blockchain. You may have heard cryptocurrency fluctuations. You may have heard companies adopting blockchain and then dropping blockchain cryptocurrencies. You may have heard about this term of billionaire bros that get wealthier and wealthier through this industry. But you probably did not hear a lot about blockchain for humanity. So before I get to talk to you about some of the use cases and why I thought beyond all that noise, there's a very interesting technology that can help humanity. I want to go back to the basics. So blockchain is essentially a type of database or digital ledger that records information chronologically by adding blocks of data into a growing chain of data blocks. So cryptocurrencies are the most common application of blockchain, and because of that, monetary data of monetary transactions are some of the most common, is one of the most common type of data inserted in those blocks. But it's not the only kind of data that could be present there. So the data within a blockchain could be really about anything. It could be, for example, about medical information, or it could be, for example, about ownership property. There's 4 key features of a blockchain that help understand why it can be applied in the humanitarian sector. So first, it's a decentralized system. What this means is that there's no central authority that controls the network. Contrary to that, it's a peer-to-peer network in which the network itself has the power to validate, secure, and add transactions to it. And this is a piece of why in the financial sector, especially, a lot of people say that blockchain enables a system without an intermediary. It's because you don't need a central system to secure and validate the movement of funds between a sender and a receiver, without the need of this central authority or intermediary. You're able to use this peer-to-peer network to facilitate transactions more directly between the sender and the receiver, and not only accelerate the speed of the transfer, but also lower the cost that otherwise this central authority would require. Security, you may have heard that it's very difficult or impossible to hack a blockchain. This is because it's a distributed network, and every new piece of data that is incorporated into a blockchain is incorporated in all the computers part of the network at the same time. So if a bad actor were to come, they would need to hack the majority of the networks at the same exact time to change the information there, which is a very difficult thing to do. Third, it's an immutable system, meaning that the transactions recorded in a blockchain are permanent. They cannot be changed. They can only be updated with new blocks of information. And this is why many times it's helpful in record keeping or when there are multiple parties in the need for one source of truth. And last, traceability. Because the blockchain stores information in a chronological order, that makes it a very interesting technology to track historic information. And this is particularly being explored in very complex supply chain, where you may want to track the origin of an asset or an item, or you may want to have more visibility throughout the distribution network of a supply chain, and you want to understand what is going on and why. So, of course, everyone knows cryptocurrencies, everyone knows Bitcoin, and this is really just one application of the blockchain technology. There are many more. And I wanted to share particularly 3 applications in the humanitarian field that I found to be incredibly interesting. So the first one is about financial inclusion, then I'm going to talk about an application in healthcare, and third, I'm going to talk about an application in food distribution. So within financial inclusion, I'm going back to the example of Usun. One of the hardest things of being forced out of your country is that you lose access to your bank account if you had one. Whether you need to receive funds from, for example, family members when you're on the move, or whether you want to keep your money secure and not in your home, having the ability to pay, receive, and hold funds digitally is a very important thing to have. And being excluded from the system is incredibly hard. This is unfortunately not something only common for refugees, but for more than 30% of the adult population in the world. How can blockchain help? As we were talking about before, by enabling this peer-to-peer network and this decentralized system without the need for a central authority, it can help connect the senders and the receivers of fundings of money more directly, which can lower the costs of the system and enable faster transactions. And to give you an example of this, through the UNICEF fund, we invested in Live Global, which is a company from Rwanda that also operates in Uganda and Kenya. And they essentially build a digital wallet that helps solve this exact problem. It helps people open an account and that helps them pay, receive, and hold money. You don't even need a smartphone, you don't need access to internet, and you don't need to be eligible for a bank account. Oh, something happened. Okay. So you don't need access to a bank account, and this has been a solution that has been developed over the past 2 years. It has been already implemented with a growing number of users every day. And by working with this increasing number of users that want to have an account with Live Global, they've proven that the transactions and the monetary transactions can happen in a matter of seconds, when otherwise you probably know how financial transactions with a bank even can take 2 days if it's a local transaction, maybe up to 5 days or more if it's an international transaction. So just a matter of seconds is a really impressive thing to enable. And also, of course, at a very, very minimum fee. Healthcare, within healthcare, and specifically thinking about the traceability of vaccine delivery. Not everyone has access to the most basic vaccines. In fact, this number is so big that 1.5 million people die every year from vaccine-preventable diseases. And this is without even thinking about the 6 million people that died from COVID over the past 2 years. The problem gets even worse when you read the latest report from the World Health Organization that says that 50% of the vaccines produced go to waste. Why do they go to waste? Mainly two causes. One is cold chain failures, which means that to preserve vaccines, most of the vaccines need to be preserved at a certain temperature. When you lose this temperature for a certain period of time, the vaccines become invalid. And the second one is expiration. So many vaccines simply expire before they're able to be distributed. Another startup that we invested through the UNICEF fund trying to solve this problem is Statwig, based in India. And they essentially build a platform that combines Internet of Things sensors with blockchain to have more visibility and trace the vaccines throughout the supply chain. So how it works is the IoT sensors are placed on the vaccine shipments, and these IoT sensors are able to collect data on a number of useful indicators from the vaccine, like for example, temperature levels. Blockchain software that goes with it is able to record the data incoming from the sensors. And not only of one party, the supply chain of vaccines is incredibly fragmented. It has multiple parties that go from the manufacturer to the distribution side, no, how to say this, application side, to the application side. There's multiple players that normally use different platforms throughout the supply chain. So having one unified platform that is able to incorporate data from all the different players was very innovative. An example of one of their implementations is about 1.5 years ago, they partnered with the government of India to track 1 million vaccines throughout the supply chain in a few more than 500 shipments. And what they saw was that they had 343 real-time notifications through the platform of things not going as planned. They were able to act on 80% of these alerts, which is an incredible progress when you think that many of these alerts would have made the vaccines invalid. And even in the 20% remaining segments where they were not able to act, it was still incredibly helpful to understand what went wrong and when. So as we spoke about before, the key features of blockchain, the fact that you're able to have this software that creates these immutable records that are recorded on real time, that gives transparency to all the players in the network, has been instrumental in ensuring the safety of the vaccines. And third, food distribution. There is enough food to feed everyone in the world, which is why it's so crazy that more than 3 million people, especially kids, die every year from undernourishment. And of course, the problem is much more about distribution and access than it is about the food available. The World Food Programme is an agency from the United Nations that has a mission to feed everyone in the world. And in 2016, they decided to build a platform called Building Blocks, where they started exploring how this kind of platform could help them deliver food, especially to people in refugee camps, where the distribution is more challenging than ever. And the interesting thing is that not only this kind of software for coordination proved to be so helpful to them, but they realized that the platform was even more helpful to incorporate all the different agencies that were sending supplies to the same group of refugees. So in refugee camps, you have medical aid going in, you have food coming in, and you also have education supplies, amongst many other things. It's a vast amount of resources and support that goes in, usually by different organizations that work on their own distribution channels to get there. This platform was crucial in helping them coordinate through all the different organizations together in one same place on real time, what was being sent and how. And this was so successful that now they're using it to deliver food to more than 1 million refugees in Jordan and Bangladesh every month. The interesting thing on top of this was the way they were delivering the food. So traditionally, you probably have, so everyone here, I'm curious, have you ever donated food to low-income people, to someone in your neighborhood? Okay, I see some nodding faces. Have you ever donated a perishable good? See, I see people saying no. That is because just it's such a challenging distribution channel that it's very difficult to distribute perishable goods to people that need them. So historically, the delivery of food, especially in refugee camps, especially to low-income people, has been non-perishable, which is much less healthy. And knowing this, what they realized is that they could also use the blockchain technology to use this peer-to-peer network to send direct money to the digital accounts of each refugee. So instead of sending food via pallets, non-perishable food, they were able to send the money directly to digital accounts much faster, more directly. And ever since they started doing this, they saved $2.5 million in bank fees. It is money that, again, is being used towards the efficiency and the continued support to the mission of the organization. So, some lessons that I've learned throughout this process. So Blockchain for Humanity is on an exploration stage. I told you about, for example, 2 startups that are working on this. They're still startups. They're still working with a limited number of users. But even though there's more questions than certainties regarding the space, there's enough evidence or promise of potential that it's still relevant, and I think justifiable to keep exploring the technology further. Having said that, there's also a lot of players looking into this, and there's a lot of funding coming into the space, even to early stage prototypes that show some level of promise. If you want to get into the space, it's kind of a good, interesting time to do so. But having said that, why blockchain? Is a question that you should have in mind if you do get into the space, whether it is by starting a project with a team or by yourself, or whether it is to join a new project, questioning why is blockchain being implemented in that specific project is a very key question to ask. Why? Because blockchain today has become a buzzword. A lot of people are trying to almost force blockchain into their project because I don't really know why. Maybe they think it sounds cooler. Not sure why, but I can say that when I was working at the UNICEF fund, I reviewed more than 1,000 projects that claim to be using blockchain. And I only found less than 1% investment ready. And I was providing seed funding. So the fact that it was such a small number of projects that were investment ready says something. There are 3 specific things that I think you could have in mind when trying to respond to this question and justify the use of blockchain. The first one is, are there multiple parties that need access to this information? The second one is there an element of mistrust between the parties that would make using this kind of software justifiable? The third one is there any value in having transparent and traceable information? The third one is, while we talked a lot about blockchain in this presentation, and the world is talking a lot more about blockchain, the final user doesn't care about blockchain. They don't care about what happens on the back end. What they care about is the problem they have and the solution you're providing. They care about how easy it is to access and use that solution. So I think one thing to have in mind if you're working in the space is that you should fall in love with the problem and not the solution, because blockchain is a means to a bigger end. The fourth one, so one interesting thing about the technology is that the majority of the applications of blockchain are open source. So what open source software means is that the software being developed is made public. It's released and published in the open. So anyone can see the software that people are developing when it's open source. So it's kind of the contrary, the opposite to proprietary development. And this is the first time that as an industry standard, people are adopting open source as the standard of the development of this technology. And this changes things a little bit, because instead of the normal methodology of working that we probably think when we're thinking about technology development, of working in silos to produce new technology, working to patent it so that no one else can use it, blockchain developers are producing new technologies and are releasing new technologies, but they also have to stay up to date of who or what else is being developed and released. And there's so many people working on this, that there's so many releases every single day that it's a very interesting dynamic. It marks this the pace of the field, and people need to have the flexibility and adapt to that kind of development. And last but not least, you can't manage what you can't measure. I can talk about this topic for hours, probably, but just to highlight some things, I would say that this is a massive problem or massive need in the humanitarian space, where there needs to be more measurement and evidence of impact of the interventions. Blockchain is no exception. If there's a promise for this technology, this will only happen if there are results that are able to live up to this promise. And before I finish, I wanted to read a few tweets that Vitalik, the founder of Ethereum, published a few years ago. So he said, so total crypto coin market cap just hit $0.5 trillion today. Have we earned it? And he asks, how many unbanked people have we unbanked? How many decentralized applications have we created that have substantial usage? How many Venezuelans have actually been protected by us from hyperinflation? How many actual usage of micropayments channels is there actually in reality? And he then says the answer to all these questions is definitely not zero. And in some cases, it's quite significant, but not enough to say it's a $0.5 trillion level of significance. This was published in 2017. And of course, somewhat more progress has happened since then. And the industry became a $2 trillion industry. But the intent and the message in these tweets, I think it still is as relevant today as it was back then. Blockchain has the potential to improve the lives of a lot of people, but it needs more teams, more implementations, more results to make that happen. So if you're interested in working in the space, I think there's no better time to do it than now. That's it. Thank you. So, are there any questions?
Just thinking about when you spoke about specifically implementing this in Rwanda, when I think about developing countries and scaling, blockchain applications, because there was like an experiment with contactless e-payments in India, which failed, which I remember reading about. So, how was it successful, or was there any ideas on how to make it very scalable, specifically in developing countries where the infrastructure requirement is significant as well?
That is a really good question, because scalability is actually one of the challenges of the technology itself. While we talked a lot about the efficiency of the technology and how fast it can process these transactions, especially financial transactions, we're still thinking at the scale where these solutions are operating, which is pretty small considering the need in the world. And to give you an idea of transactions, I think Visa can process something like 60,000 transactions per second. Ethereum today has the plan to accelerate the transactions per second, but today they can process about 30 transactions per second. They're working on improving this. There's other networks like Stellar that are able to process many more transactions per second, but the scalability is a huge problem, and there's a lot of developers in the world trying to tackle exactly that, so that the technology allows the scale that we're talking about. Yeah.
Hi, thanks a lot for your time today. I wanted to ask you about the first startup or company that you're investing at, the one on financial services. I wanted to know, how do they get the money? So I'm thinking about the person that is in Rwanda that has either cash or money in a Rwanda bank account. How that money goes into the other company, and how that person has access to that money.
Yeah, so actually, the majority of the people that were using the platform are refugees. So they actually did not have a bank account. So the way they're incorporating the funds is through partnered networks. So for example, mobile companies or businesses in the local ecosystem that is able to accept the funds.
So the initial money is in cash, I guess. And
Yes.
the cash goes into the mobile company, and then the mobile company transfer that to the
Exactly.
other company. So That would be like the normal track that they follow.
Exactly.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Yes.
Can you maybe talk about how not all blockchains are necessarily created equal, and that not just in the application, but I think in the example of Ethereum, there was famously an attack on the DAO where they exercised the mutability of the code, right? They did like a code split because somebody attacked the blockchain and they had to get their funds back. So like there's different governance over different blockchains, right? How does that work with
You mean with Ethereum Classic?
Yes.
So yeah, there are a lot of different blockchain networks today. For example, Ethereum is a network, Stellar is another network, and each network has what basically is a predetermined set of rules that governs its functioning. The
I
question
guess,
is,
what do you look at when you're evaluating different proposals for investments? What are some of the key things you look at about how the code is written?
So there's different things that you need to look into depending on what you need for your solution is. So for example, the most common application is is Bitcoin, but Bitcoin doesn't allow for many other things other than transferring money. So it doesn't allow to build applications that lets you transfer other kind of assets the way Ethereum does. So Ethereum basically helps you build a lot of different applications, like using smart code. Yeah, I don't want to using logic to apply the network to other use cases beyond monetary transactions. There's many indicators. For example, we're talking about scalability. The Ethereum network today lets you process 30 transactions per second. Stellar was built precisely for financial transactions, and they let you process 10,000 transactions per second. So depending on whether you want to create an application like a non-fungible token that can only be developed with Ethereum or other networks, but for example, not Bitcoin, or the kind of scalability you need for your prototype, you choose a network amongst that.
Thank you so much for being here. And there's, I think, a million questions I have, but where do you go to stay on top of everything? This entire industry is so new and no one's an expert because nobody knows yet. But what are your like top 10 resources that you look to stay on top of what's happening? And then also, what are a few sort of exciting places to go and work to try and solve some of these problems with blockchain?
That's a good question. I'm happy to send some resources later. So it really starts with like another question, which is, it depends what you're looking for. So for example, if you were to be a software developer, you would go to platforms like GitHub, GitLab that release software to understand and to keep track of the amount of software being developed. So that's if you're interested in the code per se. If you're interested in the humanitarian cases, they're not generally broadcasted in the mainstream news. If you're interested in cryptocurrency versus other kinds of applications, so it really depends on which part of the whole industry you're interested in. But happy to send like some resources depending on what your interest is.
And I guess the other question was just, what are a few places that you think are exciting to pursue jobs or internships at for those who are interested in this kind of work?
So
Specifically like blockchain and humanitarian.
okay, so yeah, it's a very small world, I think. And I think it's important to note that there's still not a massive amount of organizations doing that. but there's a lot of organizations that want to do it. So I think there's a few paths. So one path is educating yourself on the industry so that you can potentially sell yourself as a person that can help an organization that could benefit from it. So developing your own thesis around that and approach to an organization and tell them, I can help you do this better. This is how. So kind of creating your own role. Another one, there's, as I mentioned, several like international organizations like the UN, the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, that are exploring a lot how to use the technology. But really, if you want to learn, I think going through a startup, just because it's such an emerging field, startups are the way in which you can learn the fastest, because you have to stay up to date, you have to learn very quickly. So spotting, like I think just Googling some of the projects, or even looking for blockchain accelerators and having a list of those projects, or even like going into local forums where there's a lot of people talking about blockchain. I think that would be helpful.
What do you see as the main differences between the more public sector humanitarian applications as opposed to kind of the rest of like we talk about DeFi, supply chain, we get our groceries tracked, right? Like I know which farm it comes from, but it's very different for a refugee who knows, all of that, and same thing with vaccination tracking. What do you see kind of as the main differences of blockchain application in that sector as opposed to the rest of the more to the world?
That is an interesting point. So actually, when it comes to the technology per se, the technology in the backend is actually not that different. I mean, it's actually not different between one application and the other. But how you use it makes a big difference. And it essentially goes to the same difference in the business world, which is traditionally for-profit company has almost like the due diligence, the mandate to maximize resources. So it is a difficult, I think, balance that is being tested right now. Let's say when you're working with refugees, and you're working as a humanitarian organization, that's not your focus. Your focus is to be able to deliver the best possible solution so that you can mitigate the challenges that that group has. So having that different focus, I think, makes a difference in the choices that you're making and the fees that you're, let's say, charging throughout the process.
Yeah, I guess because we're talking like DeFi, like you can't really avoid the gas fees, right? The miners are doing that, it's all anonymous. Like that still happens.
Yeah, so not every, like going back to his question, not every network has mining, and that's another difference. And for example, there's a big difference in the blockchain implementations of networks that are what they call proof of work and proof of stake. I don't want to get into too many details, but essentially in proof of work, which is the, I guess, more traditional application of the networks, which is the one that today Bitcoin and Ethereum use, you do have really high fees, what it's called gas fees, which is the fees to do the transaction as it's growing in demand, and as it has a limited number of transactions they can process per second. But this is not an absolute rule for all the networks out there. Other networks don't need to use mining to operate, and they don't need to have such high fees. So for example, just today, but again, everything's changing so fast, but Stellar, which is a network that Lyft Global uses, charges much less gas fees, and that's why they chose it.
Hasn't spoken yet.
Sure.
Yes. So I will follow the question which was asked before about the developing countries. Like a lot of developing countries where these problems exist. the inclination or intent of solving these problems through these technologies also matter. Because transparency, do they want transparency as a government or something? Like I'm realizing it in India, they're extremely skeptical about the industry because they themselves have some intentions which is going on. And in some other parts of the world it is happening. So what do you think, like how countries are reacting in the other parts of the world where this technology is extremely new? Is it a global trend that they're skeptical? Because I only understand from India. How is it?
That is a good question. Actually, yesterday I think Bitcoin became legal currency in an African country. I think it was. I'm not sure, but I'd have to check. That to say, like the adoption is very volatile, probably as volatile as the cryptocurrencies themselves. There's some countries that have, in a way, approved the use of cryptocurrencies. There's some countries that have completely rejected, and there's some countries that have not yet taken a stand towards it. And it's complex because you have to follow these. For example, when working at UNICEF, Iran, sometimes it's just very clear, very unclear the stand of the government. And when we wanted to make an investment in an Iranian company, I had to have calls with the government of Iran to explain them how the startup was going to make a positive impact and how was the technology within the startup working. Because some countries like Iran, like they took a stand against cryptocurrencies, but not necessarily against blockchain implementations. So making that distinction was just very helpful to get that investment approved. But it's something that is just changing every day, and that is one thing that I think following the news. You get some clarity, but not like absolute clarity, because many people don't want to take a clear stand just because, one, they don't understand it that well, and two, it's changing so rapidly that they don't know what they're defending or accepting or rejecting.
When you're reviewing proposals, what stage are the companies in when they come to you? Like, is there a spectrum of white paper, some code developed, full platform, established users? What do you typically see?
Yeah. Normally they're very early stage, but I think that's also because that's the focus of the UNICEF fund, like they invest in prototypes. And I think there's mostly a diverse set of applications, but they go from idea stage into a prototype that has tested with users to actually, there was a lot of projects that were either forcing blockchain into the project and they didn't need to, or they had like this plan to do so. So yeah, it's diverse, but usually on the early front. And I honestly think that probably wasn't just because we focused on early stage, but also because there's not a lot of applications, especially in the humanitarian space, that have made a definitive, concrete, scalable progress to solving a problem using the technology. Really haven't heard about it.
I have a question. Thank you for the presentation. Based on your experience working in UNICEF, like managing these funds, do you find any challenges when it comes to managing and distributing crypto funds for these organizations that apply for the grant?
Yes, there were a lot of challenges, like some were internal, like first just getting a whole large bureaucratic organization to coordinate within each other to make this possible. That was huge. And I think going back to his question, just the changes regarding adoption or non-adoption of crypto in different countries, that makes it difficult, especially for the kind of fund I was working in. The United Nations has to respect the government decisions in each country, and the government decisions were many times just very unclear or vague or changing. So we created, of course, like a due diligence to keep track of how each country is working around this. But when you invest in more than 200 countries, it's definitely a big challenge to stay up to date in this changing environment. So we're on time. So yeah, well, thank you all for coming, and hope you got to learn something new. And yeah, happy to connect if you have any other questions.